Yes, welcome to the Bladtcast, except no substitutes or imitations. Oh, and there are many. As always, I am Christian Blatt, excited to be joined by the great, yeah, I said it, Phil Svitek. Phil, how are you this week and just in general?
Even under the current circumstances, I'm pretty good, so.
Well, you and I, in passing, mentioned Inside Out when before we started. Which of those emotions seem to be getting the most time in your head these days? I think I'm perpetually the anger, the bright red.
Anger.
Yeah,
Yeah, a mix between anger and anxiety, yeah, I
yeah,
think, and then straight into, on you. I was like,
yes,
what
right.
do I care?
Exactly. Well, I appreciate you taking the time, and I know that your film is now on Amazon. So I think we're gonna just have kind of a laid back conversation about making movies, making your movie in particular, and who knows how people will come across this, whether they're Bladtcast regulars, whether they're part of Svitek Nation, which I understand is just growing every day, and maybe they just type in
Yeah.
how to make a movie, and we'll see what we can tell them about it. So explain your movie and how people can find it on Amazon now and all that good stuff.
Yeah, so the movie's called Finding Love in Bogota, and it's on Amazon. You can just type it there, or it's free on Tubi. So, if you don't want to pay anything, but don't mind sitting through ads, you can watch it that way. Um, and it's not a coming of age story, but it's about people sort of in their 30s grappling with life, as tends to happen every now and then. And what better place to sort of do that and explore that than in a foreign country? So it's
Yeah, as I get shockingly closer to 50, in a lot of ways, like mid to late 20s is kind of coming of age in a lot of ways, because you still have so much ahead of you, and you're able to really try to figure things out at that point. You can be like, oh, I don't like this choice that I've made. I know people that you can still go into that new career. You're like, I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. It is a very transitional time period. So let's go all the way back. And at what point did you first get the idea for this story that would become your film?
so this was in sort of the middle of the pandemic, and a lot of people were starting to kind of question just life in general, right? And my group of friends generally, is 10 years above me, 10 years below me, but everyone kind of had that sentiment, right? And so, again, kind of looking back at the past, as the vaccines were sort of rolling out, but, not everything was like as accessible, there was still a lot of limitations. I thought to myself, well, okay, we're still in this weird period where we could do something, but it's not big. So what if we like went and made a movie? Like what else have we got going on? We either sitting at home or nothing else, right? And so that's kind of how the spark came about. Really, it's crazy in the sense that I essentially called various actor friends of mine and said, "Hey, would you want to do this?" They're like, "Cool, can I read the script?" I'm like, "No, I kind of need you to say yes, and then I'll write the script with you in it."
Right.
So some the people that are in the movie, they said yes. The people that aren't in the movie said no. So it's as simple
And
as that.
people like me weren't asked, but I don't know what role would have been right for me, so I'm not going to take it personally, Phil.
Yeah, I mean, I will admit, like as a filmmaker, there's so many people you do want to work with,
Sure.
and hopefully, I'm lucky enough to get to make movies long enough where I do get to work with everybody that I want to work with. So yes, you included at some point for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think live staging of South Park Bigger, Longer, Uncut is something that I think we've all needed to have happen, and that
Yeah.
film's already 25 years old. It's a fine wine. So I think that it is an interesting time. One of the most glaring is a negative connotation to it. It really stands out from watching the film that, they're coming out of buildings or they're going in, and it's a lot of like taking off and putting on masks and things. And, it definitely takes you back to sort of that time period. In my memories on my iPhone, I'll get some of the craziest pictures from 4 years ago. There's one of my wife and I at the beach, and we both have masks on. We're at the beach, and there were rules at the time. It's like, you want to be anywhere, you're going to wear one of those. And in California, it was a lot less laid back than other places, as you know. And honestly, I was just excited to be at the beach, and I
Yeah.
think I didn't have to wear one if I went in the water. I don't actually remember what the rules were, but there was also sort of that feeling of like, well, I don't really know what, I don't know what's safe. Nobody knew anything. You're talking about that time period before
Yeah.
anybody got vaccines, before it was really ready. And it was just like, at that time, I was just like, I had two small kids. I still do, but they're a lot bigger now. And it's just like, I don't know. I don't know how anything is. I don't know how to handle anything,
Yeah.
so I'm just going to kind of do whatever feels safe, and some of it does look comical now, such
Yeah.
as wearing a mask at the beach with my wife. But, you
Absolutely.
know,
And that's the crazy part. Like, you know, in the movie, COVID's a part of it, but we didn't, sometimes they have their masks, sometimes they don't, but we didn't try to draw too much attention to it. There's like, I think one overt reference to it in terms of
yeah,
calling it out. But it is more of that story of just kind of anxiety about life in general. And COVID's just kind of part of it in the background. But as far as filming it, for sure, filmmaking's hard enough, let alone having to think of, am I killing these people?
yeah,
Like
of
if I
course.
bring them
Yeah.
here, am I exposing them to, and obviously like, everyone knows the risk going into it. We all try to have it be as safe as possible, but, and luckily, I don't know if it's lucky or unlucky, but everyone for the most part had COVID. So they kind of at least had an experience with, oh, I could survive it, you know?
Yeah, no, especially, I mean, look, your cast is young, healthy people, so they probably had a sense of not worrying. And it's speaking of, it's tough to. It was such an impactful period in all of our lives. It's hard to just kind of brush past it. Whenever I meet someone that still never had it, I'm like, I don't even understand how, And then they're the ones that are like, oh, hey, I can't do that thing because I finally got it. We're like, all right, I'll see you in like a week. It's fine. Nobody worries about it anymore is kind of my point. Obviously, you're going to have your exceptions. You're going to have people who are immunocompromised, all that. But in general, it's like if you get it, it's almost like, I don't know when you had it, but I had it in January 2022. And what I remember most was that I had strep throat feel so much worse, and I'd gone to work with strep throat. It
Yeah.
was like, well, yeah. So it's crazy to think about it, but obviously you're being responsible to your cast because, yeah, obviously that's what you don't want. There were productions that were very cautiously operating, in that time period where it wasn't necessarily safe, but it's also like, we got to try and put these people to work. We want to keep movies, we want to keep the art going. But let's be honest, Phil, it was, we've got $1 billion into Mission Impossible, so we need to finish it, So
Yeah, absolutely.
there are those concerns. And that was one of those ones where, Tom Cruise like flipped out on the set for people that weren't staying separated. And unlike the Christian Bale on set tirade, everybody was pretty much on Tom Cruise's side. It's like, yeah, you're there as a privilege. You need to be responsible. So obviously, it's not a part of the story. I do think it gets referenced, the pandemic sort of in passing, and it's not really a major thing. It seems like if your story was set in 2018 or if it was set this year, there's no scene that would really be different. You know, you weren't impacted by the pandemic in that way. Was there something that you wanted to do that either you weren't able to, you know, get the clearance, or you were like, this doesn't feel as safe if we do a scene like this?
No, honestly, we got everything that we had wanted. I mean, honestly, it had nothing to do with the pandemic, and it turned out to be okay. In fact, a great thing for the movie. But there's a scene between two of the characters, named Harper and Kurt, where they were originally supposed to go to this roller rink and actually like roller rink around it. But there was
Sure.
like legitimately, we got there and there was a kids skating competition, and this was like our first official full day. And in my mind, I'm like, we are screwed. We can't even, like, nothing is happening, nothing's working. So we had to like rewrite the scene. And in hindsight, again, it turned out to be a very creative and good challenge, because I think it plays more into the movie. But so nothing pandemic wise, but a lot of, you got to be up on your feet and kind of react to the elements as they're presenting themselves to you.
Right. Yeah. So I think the interesting thing, sort of your starting point for it, is that you got people who were interested and you kind of wrote it around them, which I think most filmmakers would sort of love to have that reverse engineering process. You know, usually you have a script and then you're like, all right, now I got to find somebody to be in it. So I assume, did you know everyone in the cast fairly well before this film?
For the most part, the only one that I didn't know is Veronica, who plays Violet, who's the woman in the red dress in the image that we're seeing. So she's
Yeah.
a friend of Crystal's, the one next to her. And that's how I got to know her. But we did like 5, 6 months of rehearsals beforehand. Now that sounds more intense than it is. It ended up being around like 15 individual sessions, and not everybody was part of it. You know, sometimes we did just the two guys, and their scenes. Sometimes we did there's a lot of scenes between the sort of main guy and Violet. So we did some of their scenes together, and then some of the girls, and then a couple with just everybody. And so I think we split it up fairly evenly in terms of how everyone got to interact. But and I think that really formed that bond, going
Yeah.
into it. So everyone was pretty familiar with each other in that way.
Now, the title "Finding Love in Bogota" perhaps implies a story that isn't exactly the way the story unfolds. I think you have people who don't know each other at the start of the film who seem to all be fairly close at the end of it. But there's, so the Veronica character is engaged, and this is essentially her bachelorette party. This doesn't have something that we've probably seen numerous times before, deciding to not get married, somebody else. No one hooks up in your whole movie, Phil. I don't want to spoil that for people,
Sure.
but it does say, finding love in Bogota. But I guess what they really found was love with sort of the lowercase L, and they found, friendship. Is that more accurate?
Yeah, I think so. And particularly, like, we have sort of this myopic view of just love in general, right? And so it could be romantic, it could be friendship, but it could also be self-love. And I think all those sort of apply to some degrees, right? Even though the romantic love, no one ends up, in that way, but at least they're figuring out their own sort of stance on that aspect of it all. So, I think, yes, it's kind of like, it's billed as like a romance drama, but I think there's just more nuances to life than sometimes we give credit for. And those are more of my favorite movies rather than, listen, don't get me wrong. I do actually love a good rom-com. There's a comfort level to it, right? You watch it, you know where it's headed. But it's not always realistic of life, let's say.
Yeah, but any genre, if the film is done well, it should be, anybody should, even if it's like, oh, I hate all rom-coms. If somebody makes a good one, then you'll sit down and be like, actually, that was really good, and I think the same can be said for, pretty much anything. And I thought it was interesting to sort of, you get to know the characters, you get to watch them sort of the different dynamics, and having ensemble casts, I think, goes a long way when you actually service each of the characters. I was, within the last couple months, I was a guest on a podcast where I was talking about one of my favorite misunderstood movies from the 90s, which is Train Spotting, because people remember a couple of really glaring and kind of disturbing images, but it's actually a really fun, funny movie about a group of friends that, eventually screw each other over for, like 16,000 pounds or whatever. But, at the heart of it is still this friendship. And part of being friends is actually, I can't stand being around these people sometimes, but they're my friends. And I think that it is kind of refreshing that there wasn't any, any sort of inflated fight scenes, and I don't mean fist fights, where it's like, oh no, now they're never going to talk to each other again, and we have to try to tie that up in the third act. I think it was a very natural interaction for the groups of characters just sort of hanging out. So it was definitely refreshing in that way. It didn't feel. Sometimes a script will feel a little too writery, if that makes sense, Phil.
It does, yeah. I mean, I think part of going into it, like, life's hard enough, so that's sort of the antagonist, and they have different viewpoints on the world, and sometimes that can clash, but at the same time they recognize that, yes, there is this love for each other, and so it's how do you navigate that, and knowing that they could very easily, because given a lot of their history together, they could very easily pull out information that they know about each other and just use it with full vitriol, right?
Yeah, of course.
And so there's a level of restraint that has to go into it. But then that in its own can become, it's like, well, all right, say what you got to say. If, you're clearly hiding something, you want to say something, you're being judgy, but you're not saying it. So it was a fun dynamic to play with.
So the setting of Bogota, where does that come from in your idea of putting this film together? Getting the actors and then going and writing it. How does Bogota become the place?
So simply, with my first movie, I had met a great sound designer named Edgar Cortez, and I got to know him. He's worked on various Friends movies and things of that nature, and for whatever reason, like, we just became friends. I don't even know how these things necessarily happen. And, it was like I could look at places like Lake Tahoe or something like that and rent an Airbnb there. And it was just, if I'm being honest, just way too expensive just for the Airbnb. And all you get really is like, okay, you get nature, but that just, to me, screamed very extremely low budget. Whereas I'm like, okay, I could literally save, a good chunk of the budget and film it in Colombia, where I know people, and and I had asked him and his wife, like, hey, would you be part of this movie? Not just as sound designers and sound mixers, but like produce it with me and tell me where to go and help me get there, and figure out transportation and food and all that stuff. And they very much were on board. And that's how we kind of picked it. And Veronica, actually, she's Colombian. Her family's more from Medellin, but so for her, like, she was thrilled to be a part of it. Go to, like, make a movie in a country that she has so much ties to. And yeah, I just kind of got to know the country. Really tried to do as much research. Like, I watched so many Colombian movies that are like quintessential and stuff like that to just immerse myself, even though the sort of my out for all of it was, well, they're Americans in Colombia, so if they don't know something, it's because they're Americans in Colombia.
Right? Yeah, exactly. No, absolutely. That makes sense. And an interesting, I guess, the focus of the film it is sort of like the location seems to be, I guess, the idea of, well, a lot of people go down to places in South America because they want to have some kind of ayahuasca experience. Now, is that just something you'd heard about? Is that something that you've experienced? Is that something that you've known people who've come back? How does that factor into the story when you're
Yeah.
sort of in the development stage?
So I've overall been doing therapy for a number of years at this point, and the podcast that I've been working on, like every other podcast, mentioned something to do with ayahuasca, down to and not just like yes, people who have had the experience, but even someone like Rick Dublin, I believe is his name, who's very much in charge of like the actual clinical trials and leading the effort within the U.S. from a full-on like talking with the government, talking with medical advisors, like, being one of the top guys. And so for at that point, the shows I've been working on was like about 3 years of just full on actual research and firsthand accounts and, knowing places in Costa Rica. Costa Rica is like a big, big one in terms of where ayahuasca retreats do actually happen. But Colombia has a ton of good ones as well. And, I called up, firsthand, and part of it was we wanted to legit, do it like for the movie, but we would actually have to pay for the 4-day experience.
Oh,
And I was like, okay, well, we don't actually have 4 days just to film one scene.
yeah.
That would literally be, 40% of the time in Colombia, essentially. I mean, we were there for 14 days, so whatever the math on that is. But so we decided to just kind of more or less, kind of fake it. And, I think in hindsight, maybe that's the scene that I would have changed the most. But at the same time, because some people like everyone has a different experience of ayahuasca. And my sort of, without, I don't want to spoil too much, but, I will say in terms of the dosage that they're given, it's, it's a lot tamer than, one would, let's say, normally get that would fully induce like all the vomiting and stuff like that.
Which, by the way, the first time I ever heard about it, Howard Stern's sidekick co-host Robin Quivers returned from a trip. I don't know if it was Peru or wherever she went, and just hearing about shitting yourself and vomiting and all that, I'm like, I don't know. I feel like there's other ways to get to know the real me that it's very intriguing because of what people say about it, but it also seems like there's obviously a bit of a trade-off. And if American Cupcake's still there, good to see you. Hello, everyone from American Cupcake over there at Cupcake's Corner. And anybody in the chat who's tried ayahuasca. What do they call? There's a local name for it in your film that
Yahe.
Yahe, yeah, which I thought was actually Kanye's new name, but I realized that's actually I was mistaken. But I believe that's just fish sticks. But anyway, let's not get too far off there.
You know what?
And by the way, sorry, this is Once Over with Kaylee. This is great, Kaylee, whose podcast I was on to talk about train spotting. And yes, find the worst toilet in Scotland for those particular poops. So check out Kaylee's channel. She's been over here a few times. I've been over there. Though I've only ever been on her show once. What's that about, Kaylee? No, I'm just kidding. Great to see you. And I met her in Vegas when I was there for Hackamania. And I'm sorry, what were you going to say, Phil?
No, I think it's interesting how many people after seeing the movie essentially responded. They were like, "You've inspired me to do ayahuasca." And I'm like, "Okay, but back up. I'm like, that's wonderful that you want to seek like treatment. But as the movie indicates and tells you, like, you got to go approach it. Like, it's not just a quick solve, So part of me feels good. Part of me is horrified that, like, no, I didn't just give you license to go and do this willy-nilly. Like, that was literally the antithesis of what I tried to do with it.
No, it definitely made me feel that my stance on it is the correct one for me. Obviously, people can go on their whole journey. It's funny that we circle back to Train Spotting, because as much as I enjoyed that film, at no point was I'm like, I should probably shoot heroin at some point, shouldn't I? So sometimes that's not the lesson. What's happening?
I mean, listen, never say, people say, like, would you ever do heroin? And I'm like, listen, when I'm older and I got nothing else going on, never say never.
Never say never. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Come on.
Yeah, come on.
I don't know.
But I found that to be interesting, that it was sort of a focus. And I'm sorry, I like an idiot, I left my notes downstairs. The main characters, the two guys who are there together, what are both of their character names? I apologize for not remembering.
we have Kurt and
Yes.
what is his name?
Oh my gosh, I'm glad I put you on the spot. This is a great moment.
You know what? It's hilarious. It's that, having interviewed so many people, it is very interesting, because like they sort of have that memory fail recall, and it's like for me at this point, it's been 2 years, pretty much since we premiered, at our first film festival, and so yeah, it's been a while, but let me double check that.
I know I'm trying to find it now, actually, because I didn't realize that I had asked you a gotcha question about this.
I know, right? What an insane question.
I know. This is kind of one of my favorite questions I've ever asked someone.
It's he is played by Andrew Guy, though. It's what's crazy. I will say this, like, just to make it more of like a filmmaker thing. While we were filming it, I legitimately just used their character names, and I said, "Hey, like, I know, obviously I know your guys' names, but for my benefit, it's just going to short circuit me to go from, Khalil to Kurt to whatever. So I'm just going to use your character names." His name is Neil, by the way. So Andrew Guy.
Yeah, there you go, Neil. All right. Hey, you know what? Here's what we need for that, Phil.
There you go. But then once the movie's finished, they're back to like my friends with real names and not characters. Right. So yeah, you just kind of completely forget the character names and just remember them as people. So little insight.
Well, that's great though. So so obviously, the fact that Neil's kind of playing it all close to the vest, and he's like, oh yeah, this book was already here. I don't know. I was looking at it. Yeah, that's not something you'd be interested in, is it? It's basically like, I haven't been single for 20 years now, but back when I was like every conversation with a girl, I was like, yeah, no, it'd be pretty crazy if we went out sometime. Don't you think? Right? Wouldn't that be crazy? And usually they would say, yes, that would absolutely be crazy. I'm like, oh, thank God that I didn't ask them then. But, so it's always sort of there. And I'm glad, by the way, that the film doesn't end. It's like, yeah, I don't need to do it. And then fade to black, the end, so at least it's part of it. So, all right. So you have your cast, you have your script in that order, which I find fascinating, which I didn't know until you told me it a little earlier. So what goes into, you said you were there for 14 days. Yeah. And from the time that you first started asking people to be in it to rolling on your first scene, how much time is there between those two things?
So we committed everyone by the end of April of 2021, and we filmed in November of 2021. So, okay. That was kind of our whole pre-production, including script writing. And, and for the most part, we found certain scenes while we were doing the rehearsals, and as is typical of actors, they ask like, so when are you going to lock the script? I'm like, you don't want me to lock the script because you want me to try to keep making it better. So you shine more and stuff like that. And, obviously I told them we'll lock the script once we finish everything. So,
right. Yeah.
And I mean, it's typical, even there, like we didn't end up cutting much in the edit bay. It really was just kind of couple of moments here and there, and we did switch. We rearranged some stuff towards the end to flow a little bit better. Like the stuff with Kurt and Harper, a lot of their stuff was kind of separated out in different ways where we felt, okay, if we move this earlier, it'll actually have a bigger impact. So
right. So, so I think that, that you do have those directors, who basically Kaylee's asking the question I was about to ask in a better way because she's smarter than me. No. Did the script change a lot from not locking it, or did it feel pretty true to the original by the end? No, I think that's basically what I wanted to know. So by not locking it, what are some of the things that you find on set, that you're sort of talking about it, but what do you think was the advantage to not like, this is the script, we're done, everybody learn their lines, no messing around. When I start rolling, say your lines, and then we'll move on to the next scene, to keep it a
Yeah.
little bit more fluid than that, as the great Dr. Steve would say.
Yeah, I mean, overall, the core of the script was always there, and for the most part, we had, the beginning, the middle, and the end. We were just kind of overall reworking lines, maybe a scene here or there to, flow from one to the other, just to really elevate, what we were trying to go for. And it's kind of like there's this idea. I heard it recently. Will Smith was talking about it when they watched the first Bad Boys before it came out. That they were still working on it, and everyone turned to each other like, "Oh, this is like 90% there. Like it's pretty good." And the producer goes, "Yeah, that means we're at least halfway there." Meaning that the last 10% to get it from 90% to like a perfect grade is really hard. You can make something good, but to make it great is a lot of effort.
No, think about all the movies that we've seen in TV and, well, in my case, podcasts that we've done over the years where it was 90% good. And you're like, all right, but you're like, yeah, there probably was a little bit more room for things in there. And sometimes that last 10% is not the filmmaker's fault. It's like, no, you've used enough money. We're not going to give you any more, movies that sort of the filmmakers think they've got money built in for reshoots or adjustments or things like that. Say what you want about the John Carter movie that Disney put out like 15 years ago. The director thought that they were going to do all these reshoots, and then they're like, no, we're just going to put it out that way. It's like, all right, I mean, this is what you're going to get then, because, I had been told. And, obviously that's big, huge, major studio problems to have, but, the end result is kind of the same, just suddenly there's not the money that you thought would be there. So you kind of have to go for it, and you just hope that what you end up with is not Tommy Wiseau's The Room. I don't know if there ever was any money in the budget for that film, to be perfectly honest.
You know what? Speaking of that movie, I will say I'm amazed how many people tried to recreate a movie like that. It's like, no, the reason it works is because they were genuine about trying to make the world's best movie.
Yeah.
And
the reason...
Yeah.
The reason that movie works, The Room, is that it doesn't work. So that's why we want to watch it and why we're compelled by it. And, I've certainly been involved in short films where you make decisions like, yeah, we're just going to frame a photo of some forks and put it up on the wall because then something's on the wall and, we own the photo and we don't have to license an image and, all that stuff that goes into it. So you're down there in Bogota, and you kind of talked about the key cast and all that. About how many people were working on the production? Maybe not everyone there every day, but what's the total number of people that you're responsible for in Bogota, Phil?
So this was like summer camp, except in November, and our rule was the whole production and cast need to fit into a van, and so. We had our two friends from Colombia, Edgar and his wife, Lena. And then beyond the core five, we had myself, a makeup artist named Jen Smith, my co-DP, Jonathan Moulton, and producer, Kenny Harrison. And that was it. And we got to know our driver. His name was Hernando. He was amazing. Didn't speak a lick of English, but by the end we were communicating like you would, like we could look at each other and know we were laughing. It was just great. So you find ways to connect.
I love the practicality of that. How many people can you fit in a van? And I mean, it makes sense because your company move becomes more difficult when you're moving two companies. So. So, all right. So you're filming down there. You have your 14-day shoot. Was there anything that you felt like, my God, if only we'd had a 15th day, we could try to do this a little differently. It'd be better. Were there any of those feelings when you're basically done filming where maybe in your mind you're like, well, just like the film was not locked. I mean, the script was not locked. I wouldn't want the film to be locked right now, but it kind of has to be because we're leaving Bogota.
Yeah, so it's kind of miraculous in many ways because you wouldn't know it, but every day. So we shot in a tremendous amount of locations, all of which are all over the city. Um, and it so happened that we did kind of like a morning shoot, an afternoon shoot, and a nighttime shoot. And going from the morning shoot to the afternoon shoot, we were in a tsunami every time.
Oh no.
Like just like clockwork, that's when it rains, the streets are flooded, but you would never. I mean, there's a couple of scenes where like you can see the rain coming or whatnot, but yeah, we managed to avoid it. So we got lucky in that respect. There was one day that was just completely horrendous. And I can go into detail on that if you want, but
Oh,
essentially,
please. Yeah. No, I mean, look,
well,
there's that documentary about the Don Quixote film that Terry Gilliam tried to make.
yeah,
And Terry Gilliam, during the filming of it, he turns to the documentary filmmaker and says, well, you're going to get a great movie out of this because everything that could have gone wrong did. So I certainly want to hear that about tsunamis and things like that.
sure. Well, I'll complete this question and then I'll get back
Sure.
to that. So essentially, we just didn't end up, like, because of what happened, we couldn't finish out that day. And, there's not really room to remake stuff. And so what we did on that day was we salvaged it as best we could and got what we knew we needed in Colombia. And then, behind the scenes, Kenny, myself, and everyone else is like, okay, we'll just have to shoot X, Y, and Z in LA. We'll have to figure it out. But, that's just kind of, so we reshuffled knowing, okay, what are the stuff that we have to get here versus the stuff that we can take back with us to LA. And so it ended up working great because, the photo you just had up, the woman, Graciela, she plays kind of the woman that Veronica knows within the movie, and her son Paco and stuff like that. So that was all shot here in LA, and we would have never met her had it not been for this misfortune. And all the ayahuasca stuff, believe it or not, ended up being filmed here in Topanga Canyon.
Well, I'll tell you that it's not like I knew that with my eagle eye, and I was like, I'm gonna trick him into revealing where he actually shot it. But look, at the end of the day, that it films with interiors. A lot of times they're made on sound stages, maybe in the country it's supposed to be set, but usually not. So, obviously all you got to do is fake it. But you did a good job because I didn't go like, oh, this kind of feels like Van Nuys in the background. I don't know where Phil, Finding Love in Van Nuys doesn't have a ring to it. So
yeah, I got so the just spoiler in this way for anybody. So the her meeting her sort of the people that housed her from a while ago, that was all shot in Frogtown, and that was such a fun location. I'm like, this exists in LA. That's incredible. The ayahuasca stuff, and then the restaurant that they go to, we rented out a place here. But as far as the day, Colombia is interesting in the sense, so we had to go to a finca, which is like basically the countryside, right? The vineyards, right. The countryside, all that. The problem with going out there is, you can go through these towns, they don't actually have numbers. And I'm like, wait, I don't understand. So how does mail get delivered? Who do you know? This doesn't make sense to me. And so we're driving out there in the middle of the night. Hernando, very experienced, but he can't see anything. We don't know, and so I'm like, I have no clue where to go. Poor Khalil. I didn't want to pull Khalil to do camera for me, but Jonathan was just so tired. So I'm like, Khalil, can you step in? So Khalil steps in. However, he got food poisoning. So
no.
So, and we're on a country road and it's bumpy as can be. So he gets out of the car or the van and starts puking his brains out and pretty much screaming, "Just leave me to die." Like, quite literally. Eventually, it's like, 1 or 2 in the morning. We get to where we're supposed to get to. It is not as advertised. The beds are essentially dog beds. It's terrible. It's miserable. It's cold. The bathroom, we're all together. The bathroom itself doesn't even have a top. It's kind of like an outhouse inside the house. And so poor Khalil is trying to, we're all like trying to sleep. We're like, dude, just do what you got to do. You want to shit, you want to puke, just do it. So yeah, so no one's happy. The next day I wake up, I'm like, I know everyone's miserable. I can't even think about this day. Let me just start with breakfast. Like, if I can procure food for us, it's a minor victory that will perhaps start a snowball effect. I managed to do that. Actually, great people in the town. They even, I walked into town and I ordered so much that they're like, hey, we'll drive it to you. I'm like, okay. By the way, this is all in Spanish. Like, it's just the goodwill of people and just us communicating by me pointing what I want on the menu or something like that, Anyway, then we were running late in terms of some of the actors that were supposed to meet us for those scenes, and the people there ended up deciding that they didn't want us to film there, so we essentially lost the location.
Oh,
okay,
no.
Great. So then we're going to we went to the next place, which was supposed to be kind of the scene between Paco. So in the movie, there's a scene that takes place in the kitchen between Paco and Neil. That was supposed to take place at, where I had essentially bought those supplies. We did end up filming that, but all of a sudden it started like downpouring and whatnot. And we're driving to the next location, which we did end up filming inside. Again, we just had to be strategic, but it's in the middle of nowhere, to the point that, like, you know those movies that you see where like the road is so small and it's on this cliff and you're like, how's this gonna work? Yeah. And especially with like the rain coming down and stuff like that, like the van could not pass through, so we were stuck. So this local guy with a moped literally had to like bus us back and forth to this location. We had to like carry the women to not get them because they would have totally walked, but obviously they're in their costumes and stuff like that, so we didn't want to mess that up. So we filmed the scene, and I was like, okay, we'll figure this out. Let's just get the hell out of here. Let's go home. And it was supposed to be a day and a half. Sarah and Crystal are back getting like manis and petties, and Jonathan's having the time of his life. We come back. It's actually Friday, so we hit like Friday night traffic going back into Bogota. We don't really have great communication in that respect. So like they didn't know that we were coming back. We show up, they're like, oh, what happened? And they're all like calm and relaxed and joyous, and we're just like, miserable, tired, wet, cold. Yeah.
But I think that would be, one of the first chapters. The title of this episode is "So You Want to Make a Movie." That would be early on in a book if it was called that. It's like, yes, there's going to be elements, acts of God, all sorts of things. You were filming during a pandemic. Literally, you can't, as prepared as you think you are, it's not going to matter because something crazy is going to happen. So how much additional filming did you do when you were back in LA?
We did 3 days of filming, but it wasn't 3 full days. It's like the restaurant scene took us an hour and a half. Then we did like a half day for the finca, and then another half day for the ayahuasca stuff. So it didn't really end up being much. And it was, again, in hindsight, it sucks. It definitely sucks in the moment to have to go through that experience. And it definitely sucks when you're like, I don't have what I need from the movie. But when you can try to think on your feet in that respect, having this sort of time away from things did end up being a blessing, because, it kind of allowed us to tinker those scenes a little bit more based on what we did already have. At that point, honestly, the bigger worry is like, can I schedule all these 5 people back together? whereas like if we're in Colombia, it's like, where are you gonna go? You're with me. So, and we're filming the movie. But luckily, schedule wise, we found the time, we made it work, and
Yeah, and I mean, in LA, it
together.
can be hard to get 5 people together just to do 2 hours of karaoke, let alone like, can you film for 3 days? So I can only imagine, all of the Google calendars all open and spreadsheets and all of that. So you get everything that you feel like you're going to get. How long do you spend doing post-production on the film?
So we got back in mid-November. For the most part, I had it edited by the end of January, but I didn't have all the scenes because we were, like I said, we were still missing scenes. So I think at the end of February, we shot the restaurant scene, and then at the end of March, we shot the final stuff. But funny enough, Lena, who plays the daughter of the ayahuasca healer.
Yeah.
We couldn't get her into the US. So we had to, part of that, we had to film essentially a stand-in, which was thankfully like this person that I called is the salt of the earth, because I have to imagine it's one of the more insulting things of like, hey, I need you for the movie, but I essentially need the back of your head. I'm willing to pay you, but you got to pretend to be this person. And the whole goal is so no one knows that it's ever you, and then because we did that, then I have to go back to Colombia to film her stuff to match with the other stuff as much as possible. And luckily we did. So by the end of it, I think, in early April, we had shot everything, but also going back to Colombia allowed me to get a lot of the B-roll that, we just didn't have time for. And everyone kept saying, oh, why don't you shoot some B-roll? I'm like, because I need to shoot the movie with you guys. I can always shoot the B-roll whenever. Like, I don't need you for that. So, knowing what you need to get versus what you can hold off on, I think is just key in general.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting, sort of the I need somebody, the back of their head. It just reminds me of obviously the great early 80s film The Big Chill. When it was filmed, Kevin Costner was in it in the flashback scenes, but then they cut out all the flashback scenes. So just his hairline, he's the corpse that's being made up for the funeral at the beginning of the film. So that's all of Kevin Costner's in there. But you know what? It worked out okay for him, didn't it, Phil?
It did.
Yeah. So, you get cut out of your big break. Sometimes you might feel like nothing's ever going to happen. So just imagine one day somebody's going to be like, oh, yeah, the back of my head's actually in this movie that you should check out.
Well, I will say for her, so her name's Corinne Mika or Misha. I never pronounce her last name, so I forgive me if I don't know it. But so, like, one of the reasons I think she gets a lot of work is because she's so easy to work with. And the fact that, like, she said yes without hesitation is just incredible. And she's actually one of the main characters in my friend Jeff Graham's movie called Always Lola.
Right.
She plays the sister of the titular character named Lola. And she's phenomenal. And that's how I even sort of knew about her. And so, that's something that for me, that's something I'll never forget, that she did something like this. So, going back to what we talked about earlier, that's a person I want to work with in the future for sure, and have them shine in the way that they deserve because they did me this favor.
Right, exactly. You always remember somebody that does you a favor that they clearly don't need to do, and maybe there's not as much in it. There's clearly not as much in it for them as there is for you, just sort of helping you out in that way. And that's great. And you misspoke. Our friend Jeff Graham.
Jeff Graham.
Yeah, we both know Jeff Graham, although he has left us for greener pastures in New York. But so. All right. So you're getting the film together, you're actually doing the post-production on it. What do you do in terms of music for the film?
So we knew we always wanted this kind of one motif throughout the movie, which we actually secured before we shot anything, because if we didn't, none of it would work, right? It's literally written into the story. And Sistema Solar is the band, and they're pretty well known in Colombia, so that felt right, and we wanted to showcase that spirit of it. Then beyond anything else, we essentially, I have a composer named Cody Schramm who I've worked with on pretty much all my movies, and he brought more of the American feel to it, where meaning the scenes that are more isolated, they're more introverted together. And then Edgar, who's the sound designer, but he's also a musician, he did a lot of the Colombian music throughout the whole thing.
Right.
There's two songs that we had to, actually, there's one song that I found that we really liked and we used for the montage, and I reached out to the guy and essentially asked him if we could use it. He gave us the rights and stuff like that. We negotiated that. And then there's two songs that I had to essentially write: the ayahuasca song and the song that they dance to at like a party when it's all them together. And our beloved friend Anthony Becerra, he wrote the lyrics for it. Now, bless his heart, because I called and I'm like, this is great, this is perfect. So he's like, when do I get to sing it? I'm like, oh, sweet buddy, no. You wrote the lyrics because you're a great lyricist, and I love you for that, but you're not singing the song. We're gonna get actual people that can sing, and record it to do the song. So
yeah, you're early career Kendrick Lamar in this scenario, And no, I'm sorry, Pharrell. I said how before he actually was a recording artist, he wrote all these great songs for other people. It's like, yeah, those aren't your songs, and yes, I've often expected that I would be able to compare the great Tony B. Tony with Pharrell. Because he's so happy. Thank you very much. All right. So you get the music, you're getting it all cut together. And how long from when you finished in Bogota is the film done where you can even show it to people? Maybe you're not ready to release it yet, but where it's like, okay, it's done enough that I want people to actually see and let me know what they think.
Yeah, I think mid-April, we ended up doing like a friends and family test screening, and the movie was about an hour and 40, uncolor corrected, terrible sound. Sometimes I have to like put up a subtitle just to, let people know what's coming. And sometimes we didn't have all the lines ADR'd, but it didn't matter, and people were sort of really in love with it. We did end up cutting about 7 or 8 minutes just off of that, because I think the reaction was, for the most part, people loved all the characters together, and the faster we could get to that was better. So that's what we spent a lot of time on. And I think initially, I admit I had overwritten the character of Violet, where I think she's someone, she's kind of caught in the middle of Sophia, who's very smart, and Harper, who's not as outgoing, but, she's very sharp-tongued and so forth, where Veronica, she even says in the movie, I can't always express everything how I want to, but, that's because I just want to live life. And so, it was kind of making her more consistent with that idea. And I think that ended up making her shine really well.
So yeah, obviously, it's always fun to see a great movie and you see deleted scenes and sequences of varying lengths. And a lot of times you're like, oh yeah, that scene is actually really good and it's fun, but you also understand, well, that would really slow down the movie. And, the example that I usually use when I'm talking to somebody, and usually people are giving me, scripts to take a look at. I use the example from an unlikely film, Phil, and it's Kevin Smith's Mallrats. So if you ever see there's a DVD release there's a really long, elaborate, drawn out setup, the first 10, 15 minutes. And the note that they got from the studio, the point being that sometimes studios give good notes. Your movie's called Mallrats. How about we get to the mall? So sometimes that's my thinking when I'm reading somebody's script. How about you get to the mall? Like your movie, it's about these friends together. You want to set it up. You want to know who they are, when they're not all together. But yeah, let's get to the proverbial mall, as it were, the mall in Bogota, obviously. And I think that it has to be invaluable to get to let people kind of help you understand, okay, this is what I maybe thought we needed, but we actually don't need. And you get it down to a very tight, respectful 90 minutes, Phil. When you sent me the link, I appreciated it. And I then saw it was 90 minutes. I'm like, I appreciate that even more. I'm sure that the hour 40-minute version was fine, but I appreciate filmmakers who respect our time. And, the most recent Batman movie that was 3 hours and had a fourth act in it, as I say every couple of weeks on the show. I did not feel respected as an audience member, even though.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all owe it just to the audience, and there's no point in dragging something, and my thing is, why not try, right? I had the hour and 40 version, so I always do sort of an experiment, like, all right, if in doubt, just cut it. Let's see how it goes, and if we feel like, oh, we need it back, we can add it back, no big deal. But yeah, I do think in many ways people just kind of try to stifle them. But I will admit, there was a part of me, my first movie ended up being like about 80 minutes. And so I don't know, for some reason, I just wanted like a real movie. 90 minutes felt like a real movie.
90 minutes feels like a real movie. 80 minutes, if you go and see, a major studio movie in a theater that you paid to go into and you see that it's 80 minutes, you're like, okay, what's wrong with this? And maybe nothing, but there's that feeling of like, okay, I wanted short, but this is too short. Now I'm worried,
I mean, the great Disney classics are like, anywhere between 70 and 80.
Yeah.
So I always have that crutch, but I just wanted 90 felt like, okay, this now we're complete.
Yeah, right. No, I agree. So after that, you make your adjustments, and Kaylee's still with us. She makes a point, not if it's the best 80 minutes of your life. I don't think I've ever provided anyone with the best 80 minutes of your life. But and yes, that was a double entendre, Kaylee. Thank you for being there for that and setting me up with it. But yeah, no, I look, I mean, obviously that's why I use the example of a big budget studio movie, because that doesn't end up 80 minutes on purpose. But yeah, some of your art house films, as you say, are of varying and different lengths. So you get it down to the tight 90, as we say. And when are you ready for total strangers to see the movie? You know what I mean? So like, okay,
yeah,
your friends and family screening, who I'm sure they'll give you good advice, constructive criticism, but these are also people who know you. So they're like, well, how can I frame this criticism I may or may not have? But when you put it out there for the general public, what happens then?
Well, so we had gotten accepted into the Marina del Rey Film Festival off of a rough cut. And, so, I had to tell the team of like, all right, here's our deadline, which ironically was, so we premiered June 20th. So this week is actually our anniversary, 2-year anniversary of that premiere. Yes. But of course, it's not like you get to bring the movie on June 20th. There's a whole other slew of things that you need to do. And so I think the beginning of June was essentially our deadline to get everything done. And as you know, the ayahuasca sequence is quite involved. And that was the last thing that we were still working on, in addition to the music, the sound design, and all that. I mean, the movie is 90 minutes, but it has 47 pieces of individual music.
Right.
So that's 47 songs that have to be, created. And it's not, we had a good chunk of it. It's not like we weren't doing anything, but that definitely kind of lit a fire under our proverbial asses and was like, listen, we can't embarrass ourselves. Like, I can't have a title screen that says like insert VFX here for ayahuasca.
No, yeah, you definitely don't want that. Yeah.
It's okay if it's not like the final form, but it just needs to be good enough. And luckily, we actually did, for the most part, get it done after, and we did premiere. And I will say afterwards, we did kind of touch upon, just make adjustments to the sound design a little bit here and there. Maybe tweaked a thing here and there, but very, very minor, right? What you saw at that screening was pretty much the final movie. And it was overall a sold out crowd, maybe one or two seats kind of missing, but yes, it was a lot of people that I've gotten to know in LA, but at the same time, I've been on the receiving end when someone's like, that was good. And you know when they're faking it. And the reaction off of this didn't feel that way. Now, of course, is this a movie for everybody? No, it's not for everybody, but it doesn't have to be. So I always look at it for the right person, the right audience. This is a great movie. For someone who it's not, they're not going to enjoy it, and that's totally fine.
So. Right. Well, two things, sort of what you're talking about, seeing friends work and all that. My buddy Tim Sicarda was my roommate when I first moved out to LA. He's been on this show a couple of times, and he had the best response for one of those things. When somebody's shown you a movie and it's not good, you just go up excitedly, shake their hand, and it's like, hey man, you made a movie, oh my god, and then just leave it at that. You don't actually, don't it's like being a lawyer. Don't ask a question you don't want the answer to, like, did you like it? No, never ask that. They'll tell you if they like it, so and then it's interesting the way that you describe the film, because it is very similar to the way I describe this show, the Bladtcast, where from week to week it's always something a little different, although it's been a lot of movies the last couple months, but it's because I think it's an easy topic to talk to people about. It's very, a lot of people just talk about it in their private lives, but there are at this point almost 600 episodes of the Bladtcast, and I'll tease for our audio audience to stay tuned for the end of the show, because our visual audience knows about our 600th episode, but our audio audience, who maybe doesn't follow us on social media, they just subscribe, you don't know what's coming. So stay tuned for the end of the episode, and you'll find out a big announcement about that. That's my plug. But the way I describe the show is, my podcast is definitely not for everyone, but it's so varied from week to week. I think for everyone, there's at least one episode that they would enjoy. Yeah. A lot of people aren't necessarily going to want to, listen to one of the baseball episodes, but then somebody else I know, that'd be the only one they want to listen to, and it's all about trying to figure out, like, who's this for? And let's try and make them happy. If you had approached this, like, I want to make a movie that everyone who sits down to watch it is going to enjoy it, I can't imagine that it would have resembled what you ended up with. Also, it probably wouldn't have been your vision. It wouldn't have been you, you would have been catering to people that you don't even know. You know what I mean? Yeah. You're like, oh, well, this seems like it would be, if you were chasing the trends of late 2021, we would probably just be looking at it 2.5 years later and like, oh, what were you thinking, Phil?
Well, that's specifically why I didn't want to make it a COVID movie, was because either I was going to lean into that wholeheartedly or not. And it's funny because a lot of the reactions, just to kind of answer a question that wasn't necessarily asked, but how do you know if someone's actually genuine? Because they're relating to the character, and the amount of people that stormed the cast and like, oh my God, you were my favorite character, and I saw this of myself and you, and I learned this about myself. Like, you don't get that if they didn't like the movie, and to that effect, I've sort of been asked, I guess, like, how did I come up with, what they're all struggling with and so forth. And it's like, I just looked, the greatest, the whole point of casting people that I knew, not that they were like their characters, but it made it easier to write because I knew their voices overall. And I'd been having conversations, during the pandemic and even before then, of like, what are people going through? What's their mentality? And what's the thing that they would like to express, but they're not expressing, right? And so it's a very simple cheat in that way. And, I was talking about our mutual friend, Jeff Graham. He was like, that was really beautiful. Like, I feel like I'm going through this in my own life. And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm not Nostradamus. I just saw a trend, in
Yeah.
terms of what people were feeling and wanted to express that. So
Yeah, and I think it's even for an old man like me who, it's getting harder to remember my early 20s. I definitely remember sort of those. I was 27 when I moved from New York to LA with my aforementioned friend Tim Sicardo, and it was a pretty big step. And a lot of people in my life back in New York didn't quite understand why you would do something like that. And it was also sort of the expectation. It's like, all right, but you'll be back by Christmas. I'm like, no, I'm not moving all my shit across country so that I can, come back and do it again in like 8 months, So, and it's, I think a lot of people can definitely relate to that. And Kaylee, you're the best. That's why we love the Bladtcast, or anyone who enjoys conversations about movies. Once Over with Kaylee, the YouTube channel, and then also the audio podcast. But she talks about some truly interesting movies, and she has a great assortment of people, not just the Train Spotting episode with me, believe it or not. There are other things that are worth watching that I'm not on. So it premieres at, you said, Marina Del Rey. I think we had some pictures from that. Actually, I assume all these pictures are from that event, right?
Yeah.
The pictures that I've been sharing, except for the movie poster, as it were. So what happens between that and the fact that, the reason why you and I are talking about this is, I don't know, a couple months ago, you sent out an email to all of us who know you about how it's now available on Amazon. So what happens between that film festival and right now when people can check it out on Amazon, or as you mentioned, for free on Tubi?
That's right. So a couple of things. Number one, the main thing is you're doing festivals, right? So, and for me, a big part of it was to get as much face time with audiences as I could. So a lot of ones in Vegas, San Diego, LA, San Francisco, stuff that I knew I could get to.
Mhm.
Because with my first movie, it did a good festival run, but it was all during the pandemic. And so you get this email of like, hey, you won this film festival. People really liked it. I'm like, cool. I'm in my underwear in my apartment. Don't know if we'll live tomorrow, but that's great.
Yeah.
So it really was just about kind of getting that audience feedback and seeing what they thought of it. So we were lucky enough to do, I forget the exact number, but a good number of festivals in general. And a lot of opportunities came out of that in terms of meeting filmmakers and all that good stuff. Then, as part of that, people take notice of your movie, and then you start the distribution talks. And what's the right deal? How do you want to approach it? Things of that nature. So there's the strategic / legal side. But then there's also the technical side where it's like, okay, now I got to create subtitles for this movie. I got to make sure it's all up to spec and get it QC'd. And every platform imaginable has their own different specs of, Netflix wants a volume that's 2 levels higher than Amazon and this and that. And you got to make sure you have all the available options for everybody. So it's, it's the whole side of filmmaking that most people don't talk about. But, and of course you can pay people to do it, but it adds a big cost. And so I end up doing all my subtitles. I'm tech enough to be able to do all this other stuff.
Sure.
So I can do it. It just takes time. So you get all that prepared, and then lo and behold, we hit not 1 but 2 strikes. So even though the movie's technically ready to go, it would feel very disingenuous, and I don't know a better word, but to put out a movie amidst everyone else struggling. So we withheld and whatnot, and finally the time came around of, okay, now I think we can go ahead.
Right. So, and now, as we've said, obviously the film Finding Love in Bogota, people can find it. And, I'll stress the fact that you can watch it for free on Tubi. I have certainly watched things on Tubi in my day. It's also available on Amazon. People can find it there, Finding Love in Bogota. And I think that, perhaps if you read the description to the film, you're not sure if it would have struck your fancy if you've been watching or listening to Phil and I talk about it for an hour. Obviously, the correct thing to do next is like, well, now I got to see how it all turned out, and you can let us know what you think if you check it out. Phil, before we let people know, how they can keep in touch with you and all that great stuff. Great job, Phil. Great job, Christian. I got to run. Kaylee, thank you for hanging with us for so long. We appreciate that. And don't forget to subscribe to her channel once over with Kaylee. So what's either right now or what's next for you? I remember some messages about some things that you were going to be working on, but what are you working on right now, and what's the future hold for Phil Svitek?
So the latest project is actually a sci-fi fantasy animated 2D project. I have to add the 2D in because most people assume it's, computer generated, but I'm a fan of old school hand-drawn style. And yeah, it's very ambitious on the level of like, if I can make my own Lord of the Rings, that's what we're aiming for. Whether or not we succeed, I don't know to that level. But even even 5% of the success of Lord of the Rings is quite successful.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's 1%. You could buy a second or third home. So yeah, but it's interesting you're talking about sort of that style of animation, and you mentioned Lord of the Rings. I remember when I was a kid, there was obviously the only animation we had was 2D, but there was an animated version of The Hobbit that I would see all the time on HBO, because at least in those days, HBO would just put kid-friendly family stuff on during the day, but they only had so many movies. So I felt like The Hobbit was on every day. And I mean, I loved sort of that style, there's something to be said for, the old hand-drawn animation, or even when it's done by computer, but if it's in that style, for you personally, what are some of the, maybe not inspirations for your film in particular, but sort of films that when you think of that 2D animation style, you're like, well, I want to be able to do something that compares to that. What are some of your favorites?
Yeah, I think Hayao Miyazaki, so like Spirited Away, Princess Mononoke are kind of the obvious choices. And then you have Makoto Shinkai's like Suzume, Your Name, but he pushes it to a level that obviously I think is gorgeous, but might be one step more than I would like. X-Men 97, I think, does a wonderful job of making it feel like it's from the 90s, but it's not. Like if you literally compare the 90s version to this one, you'll notice a level of discrepancy between the two images. So I think, X-Men 97, I think, is a great.
Well, and shout out to our pal Frank Moran, who does. He's part of the character design department on that show, and I have like a million questions for him, and I try to not bother him and fanboy out. But if you're watching right now, Frank, I'll buy you lunch. It's okay, but I am going to ask you like 1,000 questions. But anyway, it's a perfect example because it is clearly in that style, but you don't have the limitations of it. Did you ever think of doing anything like the original South Park pilot, where you're doing like cutting things out of construction paper and doing bad stop motion, or do you leave that to just Trey and Matt?
I leave that to Trey and Matt. I don't think
smart.
I don't think what I was trying to create, would be benefited by that. That's not, I think there's tons of different animation styles and the people. So, like the couple of sequences that you saw within certainly the ayahuasca, that is a part of an anime. That's more of a rotoscope animation style.
Sure.
But, I've been on a journey of trying to essentially meet people with an animation that I can work with for almost 10 years. And so I found a group of animators. So right now I have a team of 10 animators. They're very skilled, and it's really trippy. Like, we're doing this proof of concept at the moment, and seeing all the character designs, seeing, it all come to life. I don't know. It's just such a joy. Not that I don't enjoy live action filmmaking, but
sure.
This has really been kind of reinvigorating, and it's both exciting because you get to like literally create a world, but it's also like, wait, what do you mean? I gotta come up with words for the sign on the thing? Can't you just put some words?
Yeah, words on there. Obviously, I think anybody who has any sense of animation knows that it is a lengthy process. Best case scenario, when do you feel like we can you and I can be talking about how your animated film is done and people are able to see it? Is that like a 3-year process? Is it less than that, or
You
what's the
know,
expectation?
if all goes as well as it can, I think anywhere between 2 to 3 years to have it completed.
Right.
Now, what does that mean in terms of public consumption? I don't know. I know one of my dreams is to do the Cannes Film Festival, and they're actually very animation friendly. Actually, a lot of film festivals are, but like that's my dream festival. So if that would be a dream to do that with this movie.
Sure. Yeah. Well,
I call it
so
done.
Cannes Film Festival 2027, maybe 2028, just to okay. So before 2030,
Yeah.
I want to see pictures of Phil at the Cannes Film Festival. Well, it's always great to chat about anything that we're enjoying, but it's nice to be able to peel back and dive into something that you were able to create. And again, people can check out the film Finding Love in Bogota for free on Tubi. Also, if you don't want to sit through ads, you can support creators by getting it on Amazon as well. Phil, if people check out the film and they want to share some thoughts with you, what's the best way to do that?
So I'm all over social media at Phil Svitek. And, like Christian, I have my own YouTube channel, and sometimes we get to collaborate. It's fun. And like you, I, put out very eclectic episodes of not every episode's for everybody, but if you're looking for a specific thing of, how to do stems for your movie, there's an episode for that, right? It'll help answer the question, and then you can move on with your life, whatever it is. So
Yeah, just think about it. It's more in depth for my son's into Cub Scouts, and I've never wanted to camp in my life, but I go camping for my kid, and so I have to look for YouTube videos on how to put this stupid tent up. This is a little bit more in depth than that, but the idea of how do you do that? You can check that out. And where do people find all that stuff? Is it just a one stop? Is it philsvitek.com or?
yeah, the website philsvitek.com, it has all the links to all of it. Even stuff that we've done, including South Park episodes. So
Yeah, well, that was a lot of fun when we got to we would have some fun doing that South Park after show for After Buzz with Tony B. Tony, the great Steph Sabra. That was definitely a peak of those years. But don't forget about you did Silicon Valley with us, didn't you? And
Silicon Valley, Jeff Graham,
you got to meet Big Head.
Big Head, of course.
Yeah, which was amazing.
Thank God for Jeff Graham, because he ran to that 7-Eleven and got big gulps for everybody.
Yeah, and by the way, Big Head never drank his. That was just probably pretty smart because he's like, I don't know what's in here, but I'll hold it up. And yeah, Nate Miller would do that with us, and he's still speaking of X-Men '97, he was one of the regulars as we were doing week to week analysis of X-Men '97 over on the Geekscape channel. So yeah, obviously a lot of roads kind of stem out of those days doing stuff for our AfterBuzz and Popcorn Talk, and it's always fun to look back on now, and just some great people that we're able to meet, such as yourself. For fans of this show, the Bladtcast, you can follow at Bladtcast, but also if you want to talk to me directly at Christian DMZ. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you prefer audio podcasts. You can find us that way, Bladtcast. But if you're listening, you probably know that. You can see it. And for our audio audience, I turn it over to a special announcement about Bladtcast number 600, as was delivered on the Who Are These Podcasts YouTube channel by the great Carl Hamburger, joined by Blind Mike Geary. They talked about what we had in store, so I'll turn it over for them. But if you're not watching the audio version, and maybe you didn't see, For our 600th episode, I was joined by Dennis Miller and John Lovitz. We talked a lot about Saturday Night Live, but my focus was particularly on their first year with, you want to talk about eclectic, the first cast that they were on with, a year that many people consider to be one of the worst in the run of the show. So I was delighted to be able to have them join me for episode 600, which you can find on the Who Are These Podcasts YouTube channel. You can also find it on my YouTube channel. The audio version I'll be up in the beginning of July. So in production order, that was actually not episode 600, Phil, but it'll be released. Audio podcast is number 600, but in a way that was 598. This is 599. So who knows? It's hard to keep track, but I've got it all up here.
It's Hollywood, baby.
It is Hollywood. The audio podcast, it'll be episode 600. That's what matters. So our audio audience can look forward to that. Bladtcast number 600. It'll be released in the beginning of July. Thanks again to Phil Svitek, everyone in the chat. That is all the time we have for now. And we will see you next time on the Bladtcast.